the fact that it happened to him, the way it happened to him. He was tricked. He was given the pill by his fellow fraternity brother who told him that it was a Xanax. He was what I would kind of call as close to a golden child as I could ever wish for. He was my first. He's the one that made me a mom. He was the best big brother to his sister and younger brother. He had this charisma about him that people were just drawn to. He always excelled from the day he started kindergarten all the way through high school. He actually, here in Phoenix, there is a well-known all-boys school called Brophy, and it's a private Catholic school. Pretty hard to get into. They usually have around 5,500 to 6,000 applicants a year for the freshman class, and they take 300. To be able to get in is quite a feat. And we started early in his 8th grade year and went through a lot of essays and interviews and processes, and we got the letter one day that he was admitted to Brophy. And we couldn't have been more proud, excited, happy for him. And it was the best decision ever. He did excellent at Brophy. He thrived there. He did so well that he got a 4-year full-ride scholarship to Arizona State. So he did great. When he was at Arizona State, his freshman year, he had a lot of friends that also went to Arizona State, and he was able to get in to one of the more popular fraternities. At first, I wasn't a big fan of it because, of course, I wanted him to do well and also not lose his scholarships and just be a good kid. But he assured me that it was a good fraternity, and it was, I believe at the time, the highest GPA fraternity on campus. So I kind of agreed with it, and everything was going along well. I knew that, they definitely had the tailgates and their share of fun. I wasn't completely naive to it. In my eyes, he was just being a college kid and probably drinking too much and doing what college kids do. One day, it was maybe 5 or 6 months prior to losing him. It was during the summer. I had been talking to him, and he said, "Oh, sometimes when we're needing to cram for a big test or something, once in a while we'll take an Adderall." And it kind of took me by surprise because, again, he's my, always has done right, stayed the path child. And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, all of us do, all of us." And he started naming names of his friends who I also knew. And I said, "Well, be real careful with that." And he said, "Well, how do you think that I get the grades that I get?" Because at that point he had like a 3.6 GPA. And I said, well, I'm not a fan, but just please be careful. And that was really not even an indication, but maybe just kind of like a whisper of something. I, at this point, was living out of state. I was living in Arkansas at the time. And it was Veterans Day, November 11th, so 11/11. And I had gone to work just like it was any day and worked the day. And there was talk about how we were going to get our first ice storm of the year. And we all left work maybe about an hour early to kind of get home, get ahead of it, get prepared for it. And I got home and I had a missed call from Ivan's dad, my ex-husband. We had been divorced for a while, so it kind of took me by surprise. And then I had 2 missed calls from his younger brother. And at that point, I knew something was up, and my heart just kind of sank. I didn't know what, but I felt myself just shaking as I was dialing the phone. So my first thought was I didn't want to call my younger son back because I didn't want it to be too traumatizing to him. So I called his dad's number, and when I called his dad, he answered, and I kind of just heard some loud shouting, and I just kept saying, I don't understand you. Tell me what's wrong. And I just remember him saying, it's Ivan and it's bad. It's Ivan and it's bad. My mind immediately went to, it was a car accident. That's where my mind went to, because what else could it have been? And he had I don't know if he had dropped the phone or thrown the phone down or what. It was just chaos at that point. Finally, my ex-husband got back on the phone and he said, I really don't know what's going on. I've heard from some of Ivan's friends and it's bad. All I can tell you is call the Tempe Police Department. So I somehow found a number and called the Tempe police, and the dispatcher, whoever answered the phone, I said, I know this is going to sound really weird, but something has happened to my son and I live out of state and he's there at ASU and I am trying to get to the bottom of this. And they knew exactly who was calling. They knew why I was calling. And as soon as she said, okay, I understand, and we are going to have an officer call you, I knew at that point that there wasn't a car accident. How I knew, why I knew, I don't know. So I said, can you please get someone on the phone? And she said, we will have someone call you. And I probably told her my name and phone number probably 5 times because I was like, I have to know. During all this, all I could think of is I've got to get there. I have got to leave and get there. So I I couldn't even put two and two together, but now the impending ice storm has hit at this point, and all planes were grounded. I waited probably about 15 minutes. No call. So I called back, and luckily I got a hold of the same lady. And I said, I haven't heard anything. No officer has called me. Can you give me an officer's name or number? She said, they know who you are. They know your son, and someone will be calling you. Finally, an officer called me, and I had to give him my information. And he said, we are sorry to inform you, but your son is deceased. And I said, how? What happened? And he said, we don't have a cause of death at this time. And I said, I have to know something. Like, was it a car accident? Did somebody shoot him? What? And he said, all the information I can give you is that he was in his room on the ASU campus at the fraternity house, and he was found deceased earlier today. When he was younger, like in middle school, he had some seizures, and he had been on medication then for seizures, but a few years later he outgrew it. They were called absence seizures. And all I could think of at this point is maybe he had a seizure in his sleep. After a very long night and phone calls, I called a few of his friends. Like, his friends were absolutely distraught. None of them could even give me any information. You know, hearing these boys that he had literally known for years just sobbing on the phone was so hard to hear. Finally, the next day, I got the first plane out, and I got here, and luckily, because of the high school that he went to, Brophy, an incredible support group kind of came around to help with the arrangements. And again, still not knowing that I'm coming here to see my son, who is now gone, and I don't know why, not even the first clue. Maybe it kind of the light bulb went off in my head was maybe when the next day when we went to the funeral home to make the arrangements. I was talking with the funeral director, and I said I would really like I know he was an organ donor, and I would really like for that to happen. And as soon as the words were coming out of my mouth, he just started shaking his head. And I kind of looked at him and I was like, but why? I know that his license says that he's an organ donor. And he just said, we won't be able to do that. When we got the first initial call that he was gone, we as parents didn't get that initial call. My daughter, Ivan's sister, Gabby, was going to school down in Tucson at the University of Arizona, and she and Ivan are only 19 months apart. So they were very close and had very close friend groups. And even though Ivan was going to school here in Tempe and she was going to school in Tucson, they still shared a lot of friends and friend groups. And she got a text one day while she was in class that said, "I'm so sorry about your brother. He was a great guy." And she was confused by the text and was like, what do you mean? And so she kind of texted a little bit with this person and said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And, she said, "This is Gabby. I think you have the wrong person." And they said, "No, I know this is Gabby, but I just wanted to tell you what a great guy your brother was." And she said, "Was?" And then I think the other person finally realized that she didn't know. And so she said, I don't know what you're talking about. And then she reached out to a couple of his other closer friends and said, "What's going on? I just got a really scary text." And his other friends wouldn't respond to her. So she knew that something was wrong. And she got a hold of one friend finally. And the friend said, "Something has happened." And she's like, "You have to call my mom or dad. You have to call my mom or dad." And it was actually that friend that called his dad and told him before we heard from the police or ASU or anybody. So it was actually my daughter that got the first communications that Ivan was gone. So then later, as time went on, they said it was going to take, it could take anywhere from 3 to 6 months to get a toxicology. And I guess it was me maybe not wanting to come to terms with reality or being naive over it. But I just kept saying, why would we need a toxicology? Why a toxicology? If you would just let me see him, then I could tell you why. I don't know why I thought that. Just that if I had seen him before, I could at least rationalize it, I had finally made my way back to work and I was sitting at work and I saw the email came through and I knew I couldn't open it at work. So I went in and told my boss that I had to go. And on the way home, my daughter calls me and I hadn't opened the email. I hadn't touched that email. My daughter called me again, just sobbing hysterically. And she said, "Why are all of Ivan's friends texting and calling me and telling me how Ivan died?" And I said, "What? What do you mean?" And she said, "They're all saying that he died because he took drugs." And I said, "Don't listen to anyone." I said, "I just got something in my email and I will let you know." So I hang up with her and I called the detective at Arizona State who I had been dealing with during all of this. I had to deal with the Arizona State campus police, the university campus police, because it happened in their jurisdiction. So at first it was the Tempe jurisdiction, but because there was not necessarily any foul play, it went under the university jurisdiction. So that's who I was dealing with. And I called him and I said, "I don't know what's going on, but my daughter found out about this toxicology even before I did. And he said, well, do you remember initially when it happened that all of the news crews and everything were here when they were bringing his body out? Well, they file a Freedom of Information Act. And so once they do that and there's any hits to that same story, then they also get it at the same time. So when the toxicology went out, it doesn't go out in any special order. So it didn't go out to the parents first. It just went out. So because it had been not only on the local news when we lost Ivan, it hit national news that week that we lost him, because there just happened to be other university students at other universities around the country, I think 2 or 3 others, where they were either university students or also fraternity students that had passed that same weekend. So it went to national news. Wow. So when the coroner's office issued the toxicology statement and that it went out, then it went out to everyone. And so then it immediately was apparently breaking news. So everybody was able to see it, and they finally found out why he died. And that's why they were also reaching out to my daughter, giving condolences. From what I could backtrack on his phone once I finally got it out of evidence, they had went and got in and out, brought it back, were playing video games, and they all just wanted to sleep in the next day because, again, it was Veterans Day and they didn't have class. So this kid said, here, I have Xanax. If you take the Xanax, you can sleep in. So he apparently bought this Xanax for $4. And the best I can track back is he took it probably at about maybe like 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the morning. And it took him probably just a few minutes later. He wasn't found until probably about 12 hours later by one of his other fraternity brothers. When I was able to finally ask the pathologist questions regarding this toxicology report that I couldn't make heads or tails of, he really didn't have anything in his system other than the fentanyl. I asked him, I said, if somebody would have been around him and been able to do something, could he have been saved? And I'll never forget reading his responses to my questions. Likely not. He had enough fentanyl in his system to cause death to 11 men. My next question was, did he know he was dying? And he said, again, likely not. It's very much a respiratory repressant, I think is how he put it, depressant, and his breaths probably just got shorter and shorter, and if it is actually any solace, it was probably kind of a peaceful death. And I guess if there's any silver lining that I have of losing my sweet, smart, perfect boy, it's that he didn't suffer. I kind of call my life before losing Ivan and after losing Ivan. It's like I've lived two separate lives now. And while it seems like it was a lifetime ago, at the same time, it seems like it just happened last week. We were planning what he was going to do for his master's program. His undergrad was sports business, and his master's program was going to be sports law. He wanted to be a sports agent. And there was nothing that was going to stop him from this, but something did. Living without one of my kids is something that I didn't think would ever happen to me. For some reason, I had to talk to the boy that, or the young man that actually found him. He had gotten up that morning because he had a job and everybody else was asleep. So he left for his job and noticed that Ivan's door was open a little bit and that he was kind of laying face down. But he just looked normal. And then he went to his job and worked all day and came back and passed his door again and noticed his door was still open the same way, and glanced in and noticed that he was still in the same position. So that's when he found him. One bad choice one night took his whole future away. It robbed him of his life. It robbed us of him. If you say, that would never be my kid, that's what I used to think. Not one of my kids. I feel like I've raised them well. I've taught them of the dangers. They're all common sense smart, I felt. And it happened to him. It took one half of a pill to end his life. One half of that Xanax sitting there took his life.